everyone, I thought I would start off this weekend vlog with a little update on what's going on. You can see by the fact that I'm wearing my hat that it's absolutely ridiculously cold out this weekend. It is Friday, February 14th. I am off for a 3-day weekend. And it is like 4 degrees outside right now, and I am not excited about it. But I am excited to try to get a handle on my currently reading list, which is completely out of control. And the first book that I'm going to tackle to try to get things back under control is The Known World by Edward P. Jones. So this is a book I picked up for Black History Month. I'm buddy reading it with Alicia. I am like 150 pages into it. Alicia's already way ahead of me, and I need to catch up with where she is so we can check back in again. This is a historical fiction book that takes place in the years before the Civil War in the American South, and we're following a bunch of different characters, the main one of which is a character named Henry Robbins, who is a freed slave who owns his own property and has now purchased slaves of his own in order to work his farm. And his parents are freed slaves. They started out in slavery and were able to purchase their way out of slavery and bought his freedom when he was a boy. And now he has, for whatever reason, decided that he needs to own slaves. And we are getting the point of view of a bunch of different characters all around Henry Robbins and his farm. And it is absolutely fascinating, this period of history. I guess I knew that in some cases freed blacks owned slaves as well, but I hadn't ever read any stories about that. And so it's just fascinating to read about this. And the writing is really great. I am loving this story so far, so I'm hoping that I can really make some major headway in this book as well as a few others this weekend. So stay tuned.
Yeah. Got a little snack for the son?
Drake, no!
Orloff is no
Hey.
more.
Oops. Somebody ruined the toy.
Orloff is dead.
Orloff didn't make it. Hey everyone, back in the car, actually getting ready to head out to our camp. It's Saturday, February 15th, and I just wanted to briefly check in about my progress on The Known World. So yesterday I was able to read up to page 274 and check in with my buddy Alicia, and this book is so good. Highly encourage you to pick it up if you have not and you're interested in historical fiction set in the 1800s before the Civil War in the South. I explained the basic premise behind this book yesterday. What I am really enjoying is this is an exploration of this former slave, now freed black person, Henry Robbins, and then we branch out from him to all of the slaves that work on his plantation, his former owner, Mr. Robbins, and his white family, and is also, some other folks that are surrounded by him. Henry's parents who have bought their own freedom and now live as free people in the South. Other people within the community, Henry's teacher, Fern, who is a black woman but who passes for white, and she's also free. And then, you have like the sheriff and the patrollers and just everybody within this community that sort of interacts with each other. And it explores the various ways in which these people know the world, or how much of the world they feel is known to them and understood by them. And it happens to be, as you continue on through this novel, you realize it's a very narrow view of the world that they have within this community. And the other thing that this book is exploring is what power does to people. So Henry has power over his slaves, and how does that change him through time? He starts off, we follow him from a young boy, a slave himself, who learns a trade and is able to be freed by his parents. And then because of the skills that he learned when he was a slave, he's able to be successful as a free man and build his own plantation. But because he looks up so much as a father figure to his former master, he emulates his former white master, and so he ends up buying his own slaves. And how does that change him through time, being the owner of other human beings? And then these other characters that interact with Henry, how does it impact them? You know, some of them own slaves, some of them don't, but they're all like stuck together in this system of human ownership. And what does that do to them as a community, as individuals? It's just fascinating and so well written, and just a good story. Like, it just makes you want to continue to read it. And I am very much enjoying it. So Alicia and I have decided that we're going to try to finish this book by the end of this weekend. But I need to put this one aside today, and I am going to try to pick up The Yellow House and catch up with my buddies on The Yellow House. So that's today's project, and I will check in with you later about my progress. Hey there, it is Monday of my 3-day weekend, and I figured I better check in with the reading progress I made, because I don't think I was able to check in yesterday at all about my reading. So yesterday I caught up with my buddy readers on this book, The Yellow House by Sarah M. Broom. This is the nonfiction memoir that we're reading, myself and Patrice and Karen from Run Right Reads. And I got up to page 192 on this one yesterday. This memoir of Sarah Broom's family growing up, her growing up in East New Orleans, in her mother's house, in a neighborhood that was basically built on swampland, and tells the story of Sarah and her, I think, 11 brothers and sisters, and her mom and her grandmother. So 3 generations basically growing up in New Orleans East. This section that we read for yesterday was really about Sarah herself and her growing up from a baby all the way through to college age years, and all the different things that she went through growing up in this area of New Orleans that really didn't get any resources and was left basically to deteriorate. And, you know, there was drug activity and just a failing system and a failing neighborhood, and what that was like to live in that area and to live in this house that was also failing and falling apart during her childhood, but was their family home that they all loved. And what it's like to live in a place where you don't want to bring your friends home and that sort of thing, and what that does to you. It was really, really good. Sarah Broom is a great writer. I love her personal story interspersed with the like social history basically of this part of New Orleans. Very good. And then I finished yesterday The Known World by Edward P. Jones. I talked about this quite a bit in my last check-in, so I won't go into it in too much more detail today. Obviously, historical fiction set in the time period before the Civil War in America, in the southern part of the U.S., and about Henry Robbins, a freed slave who then owned slaves himself, and then the community around him. So exploring slavery from that side of things. Super interesting, extremely well written, very memorable characters. I really enjoyed this book. This book is excellent. I would highly recommend it. It's been praised pretty highly here on BookTube, and I am going to continue the praises here. I really enjoyed my time spent reading this book. Enjoyed my conversations with Alicia, my buddy, for this buddy read. This book really made me think about, we know the story of slavery from the perspective of white supremacy and what whites did to blacks, but this story also delves into not only that aspect of it, but also the aspect of what blacks did to other blacks. And it was just incredible. Very, very well told story. Great one. And then I finished on my Kindle, Gentleman Jack, the story of Anne Lister, by Angela Steidele. I'll pop the picture up here because I'm not remembering the last name correctly, I don't think. And this was translated from the German. I read this for Read German Books 2020, and it was, like I said, nonfiction, a biography of Anne Lister, who was a woman in the 1800s who basically was a lesbian, loved women, and she kept extensive diaries and journals throughout her life. And those diaries and journals were found in the 1900s, and in the mid-1900s to the late 1900s, they were translated, they were written in code, and the code was discovered, and different scholars have decoded the journals and created this, different works of nonfiction about her life. Since she was quite eccentric, she basically, she lived her life in much the way a man would live their lives. Like, she had multiple love affairs, and she basically traveled all over the place without really paying much attention to convention. She was a fascinating character, but she wasn't a very nice person. And in the beginning part of the book, she is just obsessed with sex and her different female partners, which, I don't mind reading about lesbian love affairs or whatever, but Anne Lister was more interested in cataloging how many orgasms she had or how many orgasms her partner had, and it just became super tedious. Really, you wouldn't think that could become tedious, but it can. It can totally become tedious. So yeah, and it was just a lot of it just was really dry, and it became quite boring in places. I actually liked the second half of the book much better because it got away from her love affairs and love interest and more into her travels. She traveled all around Europe, and in fact the last bit of the book is her travels through Russia when she was in her 40s or late 40s, and that was fascinating. The idea of these two women traveling together, there was a weird thing about that time period where if two women traveled and roomed together, people didn't believe that there could be anything sexual between them because they didn't think women had sexual feelings in that way, like not just with each other, but like without a man being involved, there would be no sexual feelings from a woman. So nobody ever worried about two women sleeping in the same bed together, which allowed Anne Lister to basically, that's how she had all of her her sex, how she got to have sex with all these different people, where everybody was constantly putting women up together in the same bed, in the same bedroom. And that just gave her a lot of freedom to do her seduction, apply her seductive tactics on these different women. And it was really interesting to read about, well, when she traveled around, how people would just be like, oh yeah, two women, we're going to put them up and stick them in the same bed together, and never consider what that might mean. So that part was interesting. The other thing that was interesting is there's some discussion of sexually transmitted diseases and what it was like for a woman at that time period if she had contracted a sexually transmitted disease, but she didn't have a partner or a husband, and how there was basically no treatment. They couldn't get treatment for these different types of ailments, and what that would do to your quality of life. I found that quite interesting as well. But overall, it was not a great book. I didn't love it. It was quite dry, and like I said, got quite repetitive in parts. So, but 3 books completed in the last 2 days, so I consider this a big success for my sort of reading weekend here. I am going to end the vlog here and hope that you all had a great long weekend as well, and I will talk to you later.